Moog has announced the release of the Geddy Lee Minimoog. But I think they've made a serious pricing mistake, and I'll tell you why. If you don't subscribe to the Moog newsletter or do not watch certain YouTube channels, this may be new to you. It depends how far in the future you are watching this video. I got my Moog newsletter a couple of days ago. In essence, they are re-releasing the Minimoog. It's being sponsored or promoted or endorsed by Geddy Lee. So this is essentially a re-release of the 2022 re-release of the 2017 re-release of the original 1970 release. In the UK at the moment, surprisingly or perhaps not, the 2022 Minimoog can be had for as little as £4,200. In the US, Sweetwater has it for £5,000. Why have they released a new version? I shall come to that in a moment. New features in this release, apart from the red colour, include a spring which they have added to the pitch bend wheel, at last a hot rod VCA and CV sockets on the top of the unit. Now, just to let you know, I will be asking you specific questions throughout this video, and I ask because I am generally curious and do not know the answers to some questions. So before we get started, I am not out to upset anyone, honestly. Now, you can disagree with my views and my opinions, which is totally fine. If you want to make a comment about that, that's what the comment section is for. I just ask that you are polite, and I will be polite in return. Hopefully, I'm not going to say anything which is too contentious. Well, maybe at the end, but we'll see. Let's start with Geddy Lee. Do you know who he is? I guess that's the first question. Now, there are no right or wrong answers here. It's a yes or a no. I confess I had to look him up. He is the front man, the bass player and a keyboard player of Rush. So even if you are not familiar with the name Geddy Lee, I hope you're familiar with the name Rush. They are a Canadian prog rock band. Now, back in the day, I was a fan and I bought some of their albums. That's when they were on vinyl. But I don't know the names of every band member on every LP that I ever bought, and I'm afraid this one passed me by. Now, given my ignorance, I thought perhaps it was a bit of an odd choice to pick someone that I had never heard of, but perhaps I'm just personalising this too much. If you all know who he is, then obviously that is the object of the exercise. I was just thinking, if you have a synthesizer and you want a synthesist to promote it or endorse it, who would you ask? Now, this is going to be different for everyone, but personally I'm thinking, well, who's the most famous synthesist in the world? There are a few, but I reckon Jean-Michel Jarre, which most people have heard of, even if they are not musicians and synthesists. Another choice would be perhaps Rick Wakeman. Again, I think many people have heard of him, even if they are not keyboard players or synthesists. Now, I don't mean to be unkind here. There is a video which I shall link to on Reverb about Geddy Lee talking about his experience in the band with his Moog synthesizer. He's obviously very clever and very talented, and he comes across as a really nice guy. But as far as famous names go, I was just wondering if Moog had a list of famous synthesists and they sort of worked their way down until they got to him. Now, again, no disrespect intended, but I just wonder how many people interested in synthesizers will think, oh, great, Geddy Lee. I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question. So before we get to the price, which is the hub of the matter, let us see how Moog is positioning this. So I'm taking this from their website, and if you've seen some of my other videos, you know I have a degenerative eye condition, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but it does affect the way I make some of these videos. So I'm going to ask my lovely assistant to read a section to you.
The Minimoog is an instrument that has stood the test of time, and the Geddy Lee Minimoog Model D is a collector's item to be cherished for decades to come.
What I find interesting here is that Moog is positioning this not just as a musical instrument, but as a piece of history. You can buy a piece of history, a bit like buying a bit of the Berlin Wall or a moon rock, I guess, really. You can buy a bit of history, and there is the promise that this will be a collector's item. And there's another confirmatory quote elsewhere on the synthesizer page.
A unique collector's item. For musicians and collectors seeking both inspiration and history.
So I just find this really interesting. Do you know, this is another question, do you know of any other synthesizer which is being promoted as a collector's item? Now, I do know there are synth collectors, people who like to collect synths, a bit like some people like to collect stamps. The difference is stamps probably cost even more than synthesizers, but you don't need a massive room to keep them in. And there are also synth investors, people who buy synthesizers in the hope that they will appreciate in price and they will be able to sell them later on at a profit. I think you need to be clever to do that. I would probably have more chance going into a casino and putting everything on black. But the interesting thing is, this isn't just targeting the musician. They aren't saying this is the groundbreaking synthesizer which launched the history of synthesizers. Well, they are saying that as well, but they're saying, look, this is a collector's item. This is going to appreciate in value. They don't say that, but that is obviously the intention. This is the implication. So let's get to the price if you were not aware of it before. Now it is only, but at least at the time of making this video, available through a few select sources, and not all of them have information about it on their website. In the UK it is Anderton's, and they have a price of £4,999 Great British pounds. We can also buy it from Toman, which is offering a slightly better price of £4,799. The only US price I could find was in a news release, and this quoted the price at $5,499. And herein lies Moog's mistake. So I'm going to attempt to call a spade a shovel without upsetting anyone, but perhaps I will. But let's just see how it goes. When Moog released the 2022 version it was over £5,000. People were, and there were a lot of disappointed, massive Moog fans who were hoping to buy a Minimoog, a new workable Minimoog that didn't go out of tune at a reasonable price. And why did Moog pick this price? Well, I think, correct me if you know better, so I think Moog looked at the price of the second-hand Minimoogs, which at the time were running $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. I think they looked at the price and thought, if we can produce a new version of the Minimoog, just undercutting the second-hand price, then people will preferably want to buy a new one rather than an old one. So that's my take on where the price came from, and they tried to justify it with locally sourced wooden cheeks and whatever. So again, spade and shovel time. I don't think that £5,000 or even £4,000 for essentially a 50-year-old monosynth represents good value. Now, I am looking at it as a synthesizer, not as a piece of history. It's a modern instrument. It's a modern new synthesizer. Is this worth that amount of money? Well, to me, obviously, you know where I stand on that one. You may want to differ, and that is totally fine. But at the time, I think Moog, the company, was going through a difficult period, and they thought this was a good idea to get some cash into the coffers. However, that didn't work, and they were taken over by InMusic. So I'm wondering if InMusic thought, I wonder if we can repeat this and get more cash into the coffers, and we'll promote it as a collector's item and a piece of history. That's my take on it. Now, as a synthesizer, I don't think this Minimoog is worth anything like £4,000 or £5,000. I'm going to ask you another question about this in a moment. As a piece of history, well, that is your decision to make. Perhaps you do think it's worth that much, which is totally fine. So here's my contention and my assertion and why I think Moog has made a mistake with the price of the Geddy Lee Minimoog. They are selling it in part as a collector's item, not as a synthesizer. It just happens to be a synthesizer, but they are promoting it heavily as a collector's item, something which is going to be of value for decades to come. Now, let me ask you this question. If you are prepared to pay $5,500 for this collectible, would you not also be prepared to pay $10,000? Now, you might well be prepared to pay $5,500, but bulk at a $10,000 price tag. But you can see from their promotional material, this is aimed at collectors. So this is why I think Moog has dropped the ball with this one. There are many synthesists who would love a Minimoog, but they're not going to pay $5,500 for one. But collectors probably will. So why not make the most of it and charge more for a collectible rather than a synthesizer? So here's another question. If you were going to consider a Minimoog, assuming you could afford one, or perhaps you can afford one and are considering a Minimoog, would you rather have the $4,000 2022 version, which looks more like a traditional Minimoog, or pay another $1,000 or $1,500 for the red one? Let me know in the comments. There are no right or wrong answers. Now, personally, I am interested in synthesizers. I'm really interested in Moog. I think Bob Moog had an amazing heritage. He is the father, or certainly one of the fathers, of synthesizers and synthesis. And I have a lot of respect for Moog and the instruments which they produce. Now, personally, I am not interested in a Minimoog. I have software Minimoogs which do the same job, even better. I did, a couple of years ago, try the Behringer Poly D. So if you really like the hardware feel but don't want to pay $5,500 for one, have a look at the Behringer Poly D. Now, it is paraphonic. I have to say I didn't really get on with it, so I sent it back and made a video about that if you want to check that out. And if you like twiddling the dials and aren't too bothered about the keyboard, then there is also Behringer's Model D, which is a desktop synth. Incredibly inexpensive. Having said all that, I got to thinking, how much would I actually pay for a Minimoog? So I started at £100 or $100 and sort of went up, but I pay $100, possibly $200, $300. When I got to $400 or $500, I thought, no, I wouldn't pay any more than that. So that is my Minimoog figure. Ridiculous though it may be. Now, that's as me, who does not want a Minimoog, but I could be persuaded for £400 to buy one, just to say I have one and to have part of history in my studio. So what is your Minimoog price? Let me know that in the comments. Lots of questions, lots of stuff for you to answer. Get your teeth into. Let me know. Let's have a conversation about this. So I hope I haven't upset or offended anyone. I suspect if I have, they are no longer watching this video. They've either clicked off somewhere else or busy writing a scathing comment in the comment section. So with everything that's been going on with Moog, I mean, they do release some really interesting pieces of gear. The Moog Muse, for example, and they've also released a few small but very interesting desktop modules. It's great to see companies innovating in this way. But as for this collectible Minimoog, I'm not so sure. And I think about Bob Moog and his legacy, and, you know, personally, I think he would be very sad to see this. I've seen a lot of videos with him in it. I really got the impression that he was really interested in people, in the musicians who he dealt with. He was interested in the music and the music that his synthesizers could produce. He was in it for the music and not just to make money. Oh well. As always, thank you for watching. I look forward to reading and replying to your comments. See you in the next one.